The question for today is, how did we find so much evidence that acetaminophen is causing autism in susceptible babies and children? And to answer that question, I think we need to understand how much evidence we have, first of all. So it's built up over time as the scientific process goes on. When we published our first big paper on this in 2017, there were several lines of evidence, probably a dozen or so, but we didn't even really add them up. We sort of just put them together in a kind of a paragraph format and put it out there in the literature. But by 2021, when we published that paper in Minerva Pediatrics, which you can find, and you can find all this on our website, we had exactly 17 lines of evidence, and most of that is independent. There's 2 lines that are dependent on 2 other lines, so there's 15 total lines of independent evidence, and some of those lines can be broken into 2. So you get 17 total lines. And right now we have a paper in press with 20 complete lines of evidence that are telling us all the same thing. Now, when we do this work, we're not just looking for evidence that acetaminophen is causing autism in babies and children. We're also looking for any evidence that would tell us that the drug is safe. So, for example, there's dozens of published papers in the medical literature which say the drug is safe. So what we did was we took thousands of hours of time and dug through those papers and went back through time and looking at the literature. Why do we think this drug is safe? Why do so many medical doctors think this drug is safe? And what we found out was, well, it's based on false assumptions. It's based on the assumption that babies react the same to a drug as adults, which is known to be a bad assumption. It may or may not hold true. And now that we know much more about acetaminophen, we know that that absolutely does not hold true for that particular drug. Babies just process it a lot differently than adults do. So that gives us one little piece of evidence. So we do the work, we find the evidence sometimes using the scientific process. Now, I told you that we have 20 lines of evidence now in a paper that's coming out. It's called In Press, which means the editors looked at it, the reviewers have looked at it, anonymous reviewers who are scientists have looked at it and said, it's scientifically sound, we should publish this. It's 20 lines of evidence. We've already found yet another line of evidence. And what happened was we were doing experiments with a university, a local university, and we found that, wow, this drug is super toxic when you give it to a baby laboratory rat. Nobody's ever seen this kind of toxicity before because everybody's always been looking in older laboratory animals, we thought. So you go dig in the literature because you're going to write up the paper and put it in the scientific literature, and you find that, okay, wow, there is one other animal that's this sensitive to acetaminophen, and that is a house cat. So your kitty cat that you have in your house, if you give them acetaminophen, it's very, very bad for them. There's no safe dose of acetaminophen for a kitty cat. And it turns out that veterinary scientists know why there's no safe doses, because they're deficient in a certain pathway. It's called glucuronidation, but it doesn't matter. They're deficient in this certain pathway that allows an animal to safely process acetaminophen. It turns out that it's well known that babies are also deficient in this same pathway. So this is yet another line of evidence. Somebody could have put 2 and 2 together and said, wow, this is very concerning because babies are more like kitty cats than they are laboratory rats, adult laboratory rats. So this is something that could have been put together years ago, but we just now stumbled onto it. So that's line of evidence number 21, right? So it just keeps piling up. And that's how basically our ongoing process works of collecting all this mountain of evidence now that's overwhelming, telling us that acetaminophen is causing autism in susceptible babies and children.